By now, we have learned to create a simple Hello World application. And we learned that we did this by writing out system out print ln and then writing the text Hello World inside the quotation marks in the parentheses. Executing this program, of course, will cause our program to generate an output stating Hello World. Now, we're going to expand on this example in this screencast, and we're going to expand it through the use of variables. Now, a variable can be declared by first typing the type and then the name of the variable. We could call this number1. Here, int is our data type of our variable. In this case, we've chosen int, which is an integer, meaning that we can have whole numbers in this variable. And we've created a name for this variable, and we called it number1. Now, the name that you assign to your variable is arbitrary. You can choose any string or other naming scheme that adheres to the naming conventions in Java, as long as you refer back to the name that you're giving your variable when you want to use it. Now, in order to assign a value to this variable, we have two options. We can either combine our declaration statement that we have here with an assignment statement by writing equals and then whatever value we would like our variable to have, and then terminating the line with a semicolon. Or we could have chosen to terminate a line of code after the declaration, and then on the next line, for instance, make an assignment operation on number1 and give it a value. The result is the same, so this very much boils down to preference if you do one thing or the other. Now, we can use our variable, for instance, in a system out print line statement. So we could, for instance, have our program print out the value of the variable above by writing system out print line, then the parentheses, and then no quotation marks, but instead just the name of our variable. Now, if we are, and of course you need to terminate the line again with a semicolon. Now, if we run this program, what's going to happen is that now the program will do a bit of stuff behind the scenes before we see an actual output. Of course, this goes so fast that we won't notice. But before anything is written to the screen, the Java program is going to create a variable, assign that variable a value, and then we reach our print line statements down here, where we start out by writing out our hello world text, and then we write out the value of our variable. We can, of course, confirm that behavior by looking down here, where we see that now the program writes out hello world, and then on the next line, it writes out 10. Of course, 10 corresponding to the value of our variable. So why is this clever? Well, oftentimes you're in a situation where a particular value is used more than once. Say that we want to create a small calculation in here. So now I could create another variable, and we could call that number2. Now, just for the sake of variation, I'm going to combine the assignment operation with the declaration operation up here, and I'll write int number2 equals 12. Now, I'd like this value to be printed out as well. So we will do another print line down here, and here we will remember to use the other variable name. We don't need to run this program. We will anticipate that this program would print out hello world, then 10, and then 12, because number1 had the value of 10 up here, and number2 had the value of 12 down here. So if we wanted to reuse those values, we could, for instance, write a more dynamic program like this. So in that line, I wanted a plus sign to be printed out. And then down in this line here, we will have an equal sign printed out. And then finally, well, you might have guessed it, but we are going to combine the values of those two. and we're going to combine them inside this parenthesis by writing number 1 plus number 2 in order to get the result of an addition of these two numbers printed out. I could have chosen to make an intermediate step here where I declared another variable, let's call that number 3, and say that the value of the variable number 3 equals the value of number 2 plus the value of number 1. And then I could have opted to write number 3 down here instead. So let's try and run this program and see what kind of behavior we're seeing. So here we see it writes out hello world, then 10 plus 12 equals 22. That seems to check out. So why is this smarter at all? Well, imagine that these were not the two numbers that we wanted to have added together, but we don't find out until we have written our complete program. Well, if I had written 10 in here, and then down here I had written 12 plus 10, well, all the places where I had written 10, I would now have to instead make a change if I, for instance, wanted to add 12 and 12. Then I had to do it here and here. With the other program design that we had, where we used variables, we don't have to do that. Instead, what we can do is we can change the value of the variable number 1 to make sure that every place where number 1 is used, subsequently of course, the value will correspond to the new value that we put up here. So if we wanted to add 12 plus 12, well, we could just change the value of number 1 in our assignment operation up here, and the changes should kick in throughout our code. Let's see what happens. Et voila. Here we see that we have 12 plus 12 equals 24. One thing we need to keep in mind when working with variables is that a variable of a certain type can only contain data of that type. So in our example here, the variable number 1 is of type int. This means that this variable can only contain integers. This also means that while I can write 12, which is an integer, I cannot, for instance, opt to write false down here in the assignment operation. So I cannot assign the value false to a variable of type int. For this down here to be valid Java code, the type of number 1 needs to be a Boolean, or the thing on the right side of the equal sign in the assignment operation needs to be an integer.